All right, here we go. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Welcome to KC Cares, Kansas City's nonprofit voice. We're telling the stories of Kansas City nonprofits and the people behind them. KC Cares is proudly sponsored by the Ewing Marion Kaufman Foundation. I'm Ruth Baum-Biggis, and behind the scenes is partner Bobby Keys. I am so excited about our guest today. Not only have we done more than 400 now podcasts, webcasts, keeping everybody up to date on what's going on in the nonprofit community, but we're talking about something that's near and dear to both our hearts, and that is music. And we are honored to have with us Enrique Chi, who is the creative genius behind a nonprofit called Artist Mentorship, but many of you may know him from the band Making Music. Enrique, so glad you're with us.
Thank you for being here. Yeah, I need to invite you to our band practices so you can just give me that intro before I tell the guys my idea. See, I don't think they think of me as a creative genius. I think they just like, that's the guy who barks out ideas.
Happy to do that. Happy to do that. We're so glad. And I'll tell you, I think over these last months of everybody dealing with COVID-19 all over the world, music and art is so important. Let's dive in first. Let's talk about the band, because I think that's where so much of what you're doing to help particularly young people all generate it. So share with us about making music.
Making movies. I know
making movies, but you're making music.
We're making music
My
with making movies. Yeah, so you're right. The band is where this all begins. So our band started like most bands do a decade ago, and playing around Kansas City with a big dream. And I had the wherewithal to realize that you had to get out of town to find that dream. And I guess in my mind, like it's funny when I look back, our ambitions were small. I just wanted to be on tour. I didn't know that like I didn't even think about like I wanted to be a successful like businessman as an artist and like have a career. It's like those words that didn't even cross my mind. It's like I just want to go on tour. I want to play my music in different cities and experience that, no matter what that means. And so we did. We bought multiple old vans. We probably laid to rest 3 old vans, having driven them to 300,000 miles, going around the US, playing everywhere that would let us play. And I mean, that's the basement of pizza joints in Bakersfield, California, but what's cool is like when you enter into that lifestyle where you're like, we're bohemian and we don't care where we play, you kind of get to bump into the tracks of those hunter-gatherer musicians that came before you, right? So like this basement pizza joint in Bakersfield, California, Weezer played there a bajillion years ago, and those kind of stories. You're like, oh man, that's cool. It was probably the same for them too. It probably smelled like moldy beer and not a perfectly clean bar bathroom and all that, like a kind of dingy basement smell. And they probably had 15 people in the audience like we did, but it feels cool to be a part of that. We play, like the Latino organization student kid couldn't even get us into his organization's event because we maybe didn't know how to email them correctly or schedule it right. So we would play at his basement or his dorm room or their living room. Our friends in San Francisco, we played 2 house shows, in living rooms. I'm trying to think of the weirdest stuff that we played. Oh, we would play really punk rock shows sometimes too. And our music's punk rock in ethos and like, concept, like rebel against the system and speak your mind. But musically, we're not. We're kind of sensitive and play pretty music-ish. And so we play these shows with these punk bands like, and then we'd be like, get up there and play about our feelings. And the flip side of it is we play the Mexican American Fair in Omaha, Nebraska, or San Antonio, Texas. And every other artist was like norteño music or something like, and then we get up there with our electric guitars and playing rock and roll, and you could see the people in the audience like, what are they doing? Like they're singing in Spanish sometimes, but they're not supposed to be here. This is not art. This is not the music that's supposed to be at this event. So we lived kind of wild lives But the beauty of that is that we saw, because we were always knocking on these doors, and rock and roll venues sometimes didn't know what to do with us, or would say, we don't do Latino music here, so that doesn't work. We would often play with the activist community. So that would be like immigrant rights activists that are either doing an event or a house party or a event on their campus or whatever, and they would bring us in. And or there would be some music education not-for-profits that would also bring us in, one specifically in San Antonio called Network for Young Artists, that invite us to play their street fair. And here we are, we're watching all these kids perform, and they're crushing it. And we're asking, how does this work? They're like, oh, it's a cool program. For $12 a month, kids can either take guitar, piano, vocal, or dance and perform all around town, or all of the above. $12 a month. And we're just thinking to ourselves, man, that would be amazing for our community in Kansas City. Why don't we have something like that? And when we came home from tour, we just said, well, I guess we better start it. So I called John Fierro, who I had built a relationship with at the Mattie Rhodes Center, and asked him, could we start a music camp? Because it felt like something attainable. You fast forward, it's 9 years ago we started that music camp, and now that's why we have a not-for-profit to empower youth, is through all the lessons we learned that started at that music camp.
It's from your passion.
Totally.
And we find often that that's where a nonprofit starts. But let's get back to business with this. So you've got making movies, you've been traveling, you come back here, you work with another nonprofit. How important was that collaboration in what you all are today?
Oh, it's been huge. Because so that music camp ran for 5 years, 6 years before we had our own not-for-profit. And that was basically our main educational touch point, is we would work really hard to make a 1-week music camp happen. You didn't have to know how to run an organization or be a business to make a 1-week thing happen, because you can ask for favors for 1 week. You can have brilliant people. We had so many people, art therapists and educators that would either donate their time or would basically gift it to us to help make this 1 week beautiful. Now, you can't run a year-round organization like that. So we've had to learn some lessons about the business of being artists and being, I guess, community involved folks. It's like, well, once you're doing this year long, you got to find money because you got to pay people. And that's a lesson that we've been learning. But at the beginning of this, those conversations, like our first album, A La Deriva, is inspired directly from that, from meeting families in this neighborhood. For me personally, I moved to the US at 6 years old, and from Panama, and had the blessing of 2 parents that were very loving and caring, and a father with American citizenship. And because he had American citizenship, my path to American citizenship was relatively simple, though it was years in the making. It wasn't instant. I think I was 9 years old when I was able to be a naturalized citizen. I would meet these other kids, and they'd have the same challenges of language, of social norms, all this other stuff that an immigrant kid faces. And then they have this added layer. If their parents are undocumented, and maybe they're undocumented, then they see the world from the eyes of I'm not allowed to be here. It's illegal for me to be here. When they turn 15 and their friends are getting driver's permits and they can't go get one, that's usually the moment where they have the conversation. Mom, I want to get my driver's permit. So sorry, you can't. Because if the government finds out you're here undocumented, they maybe go after us. They maybe deport me, deport your dad too. And maybe what would you do? And so all of a sudden it's like, oh, I can't get a driver's permit. So driving is illegal. So my first job is illegal for me to drive to. When I'm 17 and I want to go wash dishes, it's illegal for me to exist. You put that on a kid, and the other not so favorable ways to make money become equally attractive. If going to drive to Jose Peppers to wash dishes is illegal, then might as well sell drugs. That's illegal too, but you make a lot more money. And so you saw the kids grapple with that. And some of the kids that would come to the camp were in those situations. And being from immigrant families, I felt like, a bit of survivor's guilt or something, like, oh my God, I didn't have to question that ever. And I still felt like it wasn't super easy to be an immigrant. I have feelings about it. I talk to therapists about it sometimes, here they are with this extra layer. So we didn't know how to change the world, and we don't know how to get our government to change laws. We can empower folks that do know how to do that. But we did know that music gave us a voice. So we wanted to give a voice to these young people. And our first album speaks to that. Our second album speaks to those ideas as well, loosely. And because of telling those stories, which are just the stories around us for our own family members, our own friends, like then we were labeled as kind of an activist band. And that takes us to our third album, Americana, where we intentionally leaned in. And there was like a bit of like, God, they keep saying that this is like a protest record. It's like, it wasn't a protest record. I'm talking about my cousin moving from Venezuela to Panama. I'm not protesting anything. People called it a protest record. So we said, all right, fine, we'll make a specific protest record. So in a way, the community work inspired the music and the music inspired the community work. And it's kind of been this two-headed beast this whole time.
I don't know if I'd call it a beast. I think it's a very creative way to use art as a voice and as a way to make change, a way to make difference. So let's talk a little bit. You started with this summer camp. What made you say, we want more? We want to have more impact? What drove that? And then how did you make it happen?
What drove it was the community. Folks would ask us, I remember specifically this young woman, Regina, and she's now has a bubbling artistic career. She's got some tunes out on Spotify that are doing well, and she's been performing around town before COVID and doing now a few live streams and stuff. She's such a gifted writer. When we met her, she was 13, and she had songs in her head. When a kid tells you I have songs in my head, that can mean a million things. It often means, I wrote 2 lyrics about my boyfriend or the person I have a crush on, and that's it. She had fully formed, gorgeous pieces of music in her head. Like she could start it, and 2-3 minutes later, you'd be mesmerized, and she's just singing with no frame of reference of what I put under this. How does this work? But she would have melodies and lyrics that would tell you a story, like a song's supposed to do. And that's not normal for 13-year-olds. And by fate or by accident, we just happen to be the people there to receive that creativity and say, oh my God, this is amazing. You need to do more of this, and started to inspire that and captured some of her first songs, and which allowed her to kind of find that confidence and keep growing. Well, her parents were one of the parents that just the week would end, and it's like, Regina wants to play the guitar now, because she realized, like, to write these songs better, I probably better know how to play an instrument. We found a guitar. What's next? What do we do next week? And it's like we would go back to our other lives as a little upcoming band trying to figure it out, and we didn't have an answer for next week. And we had like maybe false starts of trying to do that, where we did like a guitar lesson program at the Mattie Rhodes Center for a fall for like 3 months, and it went okay, but it was probably our own naivety. We didn't have the infrastructure or know how to build the infrastructure to make that a thriving thing. We also would put together these young songwriter workshops at the 90.9 The Bridge, and we hosted like 2 or 3 of them, and the kids were super connected, super inspired. Some of them still connected to the organization. This predates the organization. We would do that, and because there was no organization, there was no other team members around it to keep it going, the energy would fizzle, right? The kids would get together, 20 kids, they'd do a thing, and then we'd be like, all right, we're going to schedule another one of these. That was so fun. And then a couple months later, we'd schedule another one, and it would go fine, but then it would kind of fizzle. And that's when we realized, well, to grow this, which people are asking for, we have to spike the bullet and start a not-for-profit organization, which felt very un-punk rock to me. It felt like the opposite of what I was trying to live, which is being in a van, playing at the basement of the punk rock venues where really cool bands have played, and being a part of that kind of music history. And so I was resistant to it, and naively. But now I realize that that actually, like, there's kind of a punk rock, a rebelliousness to the whole bit. Anytime you are creating anything, it's kind of an act of rebellion against the universe to say, you know what, I care about this enough that I'm going to make something that didn't exist before. And so in a way, it's not an accident. We call it the program, the Rebel Sonic Academy. The organization is called Artist Mentorship. But the kind of the program that's nearest and dearest to my heart, because it's just the thing that all this work comes from, is about inspiring these young kids to be rebellious and create, because the world would tell you, nah, there's no room for you to create anymore. And I think that that's a myth.
Oh, I love that. So I want our audience to know if they want to go find out more information. Website?
artasmentorship.org. So art as mentorship.org. And the name of the organization is because is drawn out of this idea that it can be various art forms, but I could have never pulled any of this off without amazing mentors. And I don't think anyone who's successful can end up where they are without people who come along the path and say, hey, you're walking the right direction. You just got to walk a little bit more this way. And that's been crucial to our success.
We're talking with Enrique Chi as the founder, as Art as Mentorship, but Making Movies, the band, may be where you know him best. We're going to come back in a moment after this break and get more into the major things they're doing in our community. We're talking with Enrique Chi, Art as Mentorship, Making Movies band, making nonprofits. You yourself said it. What are a bunch of musicians who tour in their vans, playing all over the place, doing business, so to speak. As you went to create the nonprofit, who helped you? How did you do it? As you said, you're a bunch of musicians. This is not the usual business that you're used to.
Well, at that point, when we founded the not-for-profit, Making Movies had risen to national acclaim at maybe the baby step of it. But we had done an NPR Tiny Desk concert and had been reviewed favorably by national magazines. And now we're kind of, we had done our second record produced by Steve Berlin of Los Lobos. And so we were kind of moving up in the world, still struggling to figure it all out, but it had changed, and that brought really interesting people into my network. So folks like John Gordon, who, I mean, speaking of him, I've known him since we would play a rooftop bar downtown Kansas City called John's Big Deck. And I remember it was like the best gig in my mind at the time, because they would pay you $500 a gig, right? But you have to play for 5 hours, which I learned the hard way when we finished our fourth set one night at 1 a.m. And they said, do you have another, you guys know you have to play another set? And because I said, thank you, good night. And they're like, you have to play another hour. I don't know if you knew that. It's like, we don't have any more songs. So we had to repeat, songs from earlier in the night. But it was the best gig because you would play Friday and Saturday night, sometimes Thursday, Friday, and Saturday night. It was crazy loading. You had to load up all your equipment up 3 flights of stairs. And so since they book you twice, we would just go, oh my God, we could make $1,000, which sounded like $1 million. And we could put that in the bank and we could record our music, or we could buy that van and we could go on tour. We're going to make our dreams come true. That's how I met John. But John Gordon runs an amazing organization called Boys Grow. And he was one of the first people I sat down with and said, John, I think I want to grow this work. Do you think we can do this? Do you think we could grow a not-for-profit? And he gave me a lot of the confidence to do so. Bo Bledsoe is another very talented musician here in Kansas City. Ensemble Iberica is his not-for-profit. And same thing, he goes, the work you're doing sounds like a not-for-profit. It's like, it'll take you 3 years of hard work, but I think you could do it. You could build an organization to grow this stuff. And without folks like that giving us the confidence to do it, we wouldn't have been able to start. And then it was, a lot of the folks that had helped with the music camp and that had helped us along the way pitched in to teach us these things and to mentor us. And we, I learned how to write bylaws and what that all means and form a small board of directors, and off we went. We hosted a concert that we used to call Making Movies Carnaval. That was like our little community event where we would book out knuckleheads, both stages. We'd invite our friends from out of town that wouldn't normally come to Kansas City, usually Latino music or immigrant music from the United States, and sometimes international music, and bring them to Kansas City, throw an event around it, and raise money for the programming. And the first year we did that, we were able to raise like $13,000, and we're like, all right, this is it. We can run a 12-week music program, and at the end of it, we're going to fly Steve Berlin from Los Lobos here to Kansas City to record the kids, so that the kids feel like, not like this is like, oh, this is the music camp at that community center, but this is very professional. This is very intentional. and serious. At the end of the program, you're going to record with a multi-Grammy winning producer. And that really worked. That idea that to take the music seriously, to take it like this is a great opportunity, has created a culture around the organization where these kids, they kind of rise to the occasion. And you'd be floored by the music they're creating. I'll send you some clips that you can check out. Even in this pandemic, we're creating virtual collaborations, and some of this music is, I mean, I think beats the things that we hear on the radio.
So let's talk about the pandemic, something none of us have been able to avoid. How have you, with something that's a very, it's visceral and that the vibe of being in the same place, the same time, how have you been able to transcend the limitations that have been placed on all of us and continue to meet your mission with these kids?
Well, it actually, for artist mentorship, though we're missing having the kids together. Like the music camp that we would have at the historic Northeast every year was a highlight of my year. I used to kind of like dread the week because I knew I was not going to sleep very much, and having 40 kids I mean, even if as the camp went on, I was less and less a teacher in the camp and more of an organizer for the camp and hired teachers. But it still I felt the weight of like, there's 40 kids, and if something goes wrong, it's my fault. You know, like I like that was like a tough week. But this year when we couldn't have the camp, I like missed it hard. I was like, oh man, that's such a fun week. These kids, they walk in the door, and at the end of the week, they're performing their own music. Last year in 2019, the Crossroads opened the doors to us. So they played a first Friday at the Crossroads stage behind Grinders. They opened the show. And there was a small crowd there. It wasn't 30,000 people. There was 300 people there at that time for them. But some of those kids had never touched an instrument on Monday. And on Friday night, they are playing on the Crossroads stage, and they're seeing the big PA and the kind of stage hands that are like moving all the mics and the cables and all that. And you could see their eyes like, whoa, this is how music works. This is cool. I missed it. So not to say that it's been all positive, but the pandemic, by forcing me home, has allowed me to focus on this work and to think strategically and to break out of maybe ruts that I had been in. Like we just were doing things the way we were doing them because that's the way we had done them, not because they were necessarily the best way. And something kind of magical about the work that we uncovered on accident was, you know, we have this music camp, and we're trying to figure out we'd have some kids that come in with a lot of musical skill set. And maybe some of them had a little more affluence. They were making movies, had enough rapport. Maybe a parent had heard of us on NPR, heard me talk about the camp, and they're driving their kid into the inner city to come to this music camp. While next to them is a kid from the neighborhood, you know, so it's like two different conversations are happening. There's a kid from the neighborhood with a guitar on his back, walking by the drifters and the homeless community and the boarded up houses to get to the Mattie Rhodes Center, and they're walking up the steps. While there's another family coming from the suburbs with, you know, the dad drinking coffee because he's dropping his kid off before work. And he's having to have the conversation with his kids. Yeah, there's some neighborhoods like this where there's boarded up houses, where there's, you know, there's homeless populations and things like this. Yeah, that happens in our community. So that's actually part of the magic of all this work. But then you get those two kids sitting next to each other. How do you make a camp fun for both of them? And we had the first year that the camp kind of grew like that, from being a small community to like 40 kids. It was the second year of the camp. We were panicking, like, how do we make it fun for these two sets of kids? And we just like stumbled into like, well, songwriting, because that way the kid who's never played, he can at least be creatively involved. And what ended up happening is that the students who maybe didn't have as much education behind them, music education, but maybe had been through some things in their neighborhood and their community, usually had a lot to say and had never been gifted the space to say it. And so all of a sudden, the playing field was leveled, and it didn't matter how many music classes you had, how fancy your guitar was or wasn't. You were there, and everybody was really kind of like pushing themselves creatively, not on a skill-based level. That angle for our organization has made virtual programming work. I think if you were teaching a guitar lesson virtually, you can do that. But if you're teaching a group music class, an orchestra class, a choir, man, I feel for those educators. That's a beautiful thing to do. And I don't know how they're succeeding with Zoom. But since our focus is switched completely into the creative process, it works virtually because you can have a conversation about it. You can say, hey, so what we need is to finish the verse. So the verse, what moods should we have? What things? Okay, cool. That's your assignment. Go finish the verse. And they can hop off the Zoom call and work creatively and then present to us their idea. And that's how we've been able to create virtual collaborations. So that has been a blessing for us, that the things that we're teaching work effectively. And then this idea where we would fly Steve Berlin to Kansas City to have him record the kids. And our idea was to have different producers throughout the years come through and work with the students. And I think that is something that will come back in the pandemic. But as soon as we had the pandemic, I started calling my friends who were on tour and saying, hey, could I offer you an honorarium and come talk to the young songwriters virtually and do an interview? And we did 23 of these sessions that we're calling the Rebel Song Academy Live, so RSA Live sessions. We had Los Lobos, Oso Motley, Black Pumas are nominated for 3 Grammys right now. Chicano Batman, who played the Colbert Show the night that they did our Zoom call with the kids. We had Hippocampus, a band with 2 million Spotify listeners. The kids are all blushing because they're like, I'm such a big fan. Like, I want to hear what you all have to say. And the kids get to kind of do what you're doing, where they get to interview the guests and ask them about their creative process. And so that has been something that's like, wait a second, that's way cheaper than flying somebody to Kansas City and way easier to schedule. So that's not going to go away. We can do that every year now. So we're booking out 3 seasons of it for next year. We have amazing guests already lined up. And for the kids, that's always been the hook, is that I think the first real songwriting class we held was when we invited Hooray for the Riff Raff to Kansas City. And she was on the verge of releasing a new album. When she released her new album, she did like the late night circuit. She was listed in Rolling Stone, like one of the top 10 albums of the year, Spin Magazine. And she's a New Yorican, so she's Puerto Rican, raised in Queens, I think, or the Bronx. And she's bicultural and queer, and the kids could resonate with, like, wait a second, this is not a person that was born with a ton of resources. This is a person that's had challenges in their life, and they're like me. They're diverse. They come from a family that's not the stereotypical American family, and they're finding success. That light bulb went off for a few of these kids, I think Regina included. And when we're doing that with the live program, we get to do that every week, for a season, and have these kids experience that. Wait a second, this is a real human being. And when they tell the stories, like, oh yeah, I stumbled into this. I knew I wanted to do music, and I made this mistake and that mistake, and then I found this lane, and I worked really hard. And that was there's a couple consistent parallels with all the guests that are successful. They hustled and hustled and hustled for years, and they were willing to be vulnerable, and they were willing to accept that they needed mentors and a village in their life. None of them were like, yeah, I did this all by myself. I got to this successful point by not having any help from anybody. They all had stories of, this person helped me, this community worked around me, this thing lifted me up. And so we're creating that culture within these young people, saying, this is what we need to do for each other. We've got to lift each other up. And that's how we succeed.
Can any kid be involved?
We're looking for students that are 12 to 18 years old. The RSA Live program is literally any kid. When we announce the concert dates, you sign up on the website, you get emailed the link, totally free. You can show up. You don't have to have done anything to be there. The Rebel Song Academy is a 12-week program where we are more selective, where we want kids who are already songwriting, and they want to, they're pursuing this in a serious manner. So there's a bit of an audition process for the Rebel Song Academy. For the music camp, there's not really an audition process. It's meant for, are you interested in creating your own music? Sign up. And so this year, the camp in 2021, we are not sure if it'll be virtual, in person, or some hybrid. Hopefully that there's at least some hybrid, but I think we'll do a version of it either way. So we try to have a couple of touch points where you can start at zero and get involved. And then if you want to take on that 12-week program, which is kind of a leadership development 12-week program, you kind of have to already have been cooking up your own music at least a little bit by yourself.
How can the community help you? in what you're doing. You're mentoring young kids, you're inspiring creativity, songwriting, all this. So how can we as a community help artist mentorship?
Well, I think in January, we will be turning the corner on building our own recording studio in an urban art house, and the walls will be going up. We're looking for a little bit of funding to finish equipping that studio. It's not a ton, but doing something world class takes some money. So that would be a space where the community can rise to the occasion. I know a lot of us have been impacted by COVID, so don't take that as like the only way to help us is by helping financially. But if you are in a position where you can, that would be amazing. And you can donate on the website. You can write me an email. We can talk about it. You may have equipment or know someone that has access to equipment. The second thing I think is that we're a young organization, truth be told. And so just telling the story, telling people, I heard about artist mentorship. I heard that they're doing this work. That's important. And for those who are music educators or educators in general, we're starting something called a First Fans program. And this is for adults that are student facing for some reason, whether they could be a soccer coach, they can be a social worker, they can be a therapist. But what we realized is, and the pandemic has shown us this, the kids that need this stuff the most need the most help being brought to the table. The students who are getting a lot out of it instantly already kind of have some of these tools and resources. You can see it on the Zoom call. You can see the caliber of their, the how well painted their bedroom is, and the guitars are on the wall and the stuff. And I think it's not because these other students wouldn't want to be there, but I think it's a cultural thing. If you see your parents in the pandemic switch to a very Zoom-centric life and have business calls and all this, and you see them be successful, then when someone says, hey, there's a music program happening virtually, you have to log in to this thing and you have to sit there in front of your computer, and they already see like, oh, that's a thing people do. I get it. If your parents work maybe, some sort of manual labor job or something like that, or maybe they don't have that type of career, perhaps as a 12 or 14-year-old, you've already been on Zoom all day. You're already kind of tired of all this stuff. Though you would get a ton out of it, you might just not even know that you would get a ton out of it. So we need people who are student facing, that when they see a kid that's using music or as a way of really expressing themselves or coping with something, let them know we exist. The programming is all effectively free. I think our music camp has a little admission fee to pay for lunch basically, but the camp is free. All these, the Rebel Song Academy, the RSA Live, everything's free. So there's no cost. It's not cost prohibitive at all. But what it is sometimes like culturally prohibitive. Like a kid may not know that I really need to borrow my mom's phone because I want to be involved in this program, and I need to make sure that it's important to her and important to me. At 7 o'clock, I'm available to do the program. Until we get back to a pandemic-free or pandemic-controlled, existence, where we could put a program in the neighborhood and pass out flyers and have the kid walk up to the camp. We're going to have to meet that gap. And so, sorry to go into kind of a long tangent about that, but for the next 6 months, that's huge, because the kids who are really struggling, they're going to need the most help, knowing that there are things that they can do to keep themselves engaged and grow musically.
Well, from a guy who's used to living in a van and touring all over to now running a nonprofit and creating a studio and everything, I can see that this really has gotten to you. This is part of your creativity.